Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna take a look at some Lost Ark content. I've been playing Lost Ark since the release of the Russian version really, and have mostly played PvP, so I can't really make a PvE tier list. So I think it would be fun to just give my 2 cents on the current state of the PvP, and not only for the beta but also for the release version of the game, because I believe the PvP balance patches are pretty far and wide in between, timing wise at least. I don't know if that made any sense, probably didn't. And we're gonna take a look at what's going on and what's gonna happen, what you should look into, what classes I think have the most potential, and so on. So from the get-go you can make your class choices with a little bit more of an educated perspective. So let's start from, well, the B right here, the Battlemaster, which also I would put into the B category here. I think Battlemaster is somewhat underrated, but at the same time pretty scuffed in a couple of ways. Battlemaster struggles with having a lack of super armor, so you're a melee class, so if you don't have any way to protect yourself while you're fighting someone, it's going to be really hard to keep yourself alive and keep yourself fighting, because if you're always on the floor, you can't do anything about that. On top of that, you have some mana issues, but generally speaking, this is one of the most fluid classes in the game, and has team utility on top of that. So I think Battlemaster has potential. I don't think it's the worst class in the game. I used to think that actually, but some people make it work. So if you like a handicap when playing PvP, I would recommend Battlemaster, I guess. Next up, we'll go to Bard. I think this is a no-brainer. This will be an S tier every single time on every single tier list. As I said before, this is ordered, so you guys will see how I rate the other classes in comparison to the ones that I already put in. Bard is the most supportive class in the entire game by far, has the most tools to support your teammates by mitigating damage, enabling more damage on your teammates, and giving them shields. One of the best ultimates in the game on top of that. But don't make the mistake on playing this class on DPS. If you play DPS Bard and PvP, you're trolling. There's no build that works. So next up is Zerker. I think Zerker is a lower A tier. I think the class really depends on the team comps, and it really depends what your team plays and what the enemy team plays. There's no one to give Berserkers. It's like a hyper carry in like League of Legends or something. If this class doesn't get supported, it falls flat on its face and can't do anything. If it does get supported and there's multiple pressure points in your team, the class can do very well, especially in conjunction with a Bard. A lot of damage if you can pull it off, but again, it's not super easy to pull it off. Next up is Blade. I think it's also a no-brainer that this is an S tier for our version, because Destroyer, Lancemaster, Arcana, Reaper, Scouter, all classes that Blade doesn't really like playing against too much. Arcana is maybe the only exception to that. This basically is a huge buff that these classes are in our version, so Blade is already S tier, although it got nerfed a lot recently, so I don't think it's like the best class ever. A lot of new players think that. I'm a little bit biased because I play that class, but Blade is not the hyper overpowered class that you may think it is in the beginning. I thought that as well, because it does have a lot of super armors and it does have a lot of CC, but it has pretty long cooldowns. The stun duration was nerfed recently, so a lot of combos don't really work anymore, but overall still an amazing class, and the class that I will main on release. Next up is Blaster, and Blaster is in a similar position as Berserker, just with less potential in my opinion, so I'll put it in high B tier here. Blaster is also very team comp dependent, and especially dependent on the enemy team comp. It's one of those classes that you would consider a noob stomper, especially when you play melee classes into him. Blaster can one combo you in literally, like if you get hit once, he can take away like 70-80% of your health, which is very frustrating to deal with even on the highest level, but the class is pretty linear and does not have that much, not a high skill ceiling. So in the beginning you will think Blaster is pretty broken, because in some matchups it is, but in a lot of others it's not. It's basically only a melee counter, so the moment you play something like Demonic, Devil Hunter, Gunslinger, Hawkeye, Blaster is not that much of a threat anymore. Next up is Demonic, and for me Demonic is always a little bit hard to rate, because in the other versions Scouter is basically just a better version of Demonic in most ways, at least. But since we don't have a Scouter, Demonic, I think, will sit pretty tightly on A tier. I would even put her above Zerker, I think, in most matchups. She's very explosive, nice burst mobility, and most of the time she's actually a range class, by the way, so a lot of people get that confused. Demonic is, let's say, 80% of the match a ranged class, and you use it as a peeler. You use your range to peel, but you also use your melee burst mobility to go in and just do some burst damage and get out again, basically. Her identity is also somewhat along the lines of Berserker in the sense that it's a hyper carry. So if the Demonic is in Demonic form and she's not supported at all by your team, she will probably not do anything and probably just get wrecked because she has no protection on it besides stagger resist. Yeah, I think Demonic is pretty decent. I don't think she's an S tier by any means, but I think she's pretty good, especially with these classes not in the game. And next up, Devil Hunter and Gunslinger, which are the, well, counterparts of each other, but generally speaking, Gunslinger is considered better, and Devil Hunter is considered not as good. I think Devil Hunter does a little bit better in melee matchups, and Gunslinger does a little bit better in ranged matchups, but generally speaking, they're very similar. On the highest level play, I think they're better than Blades, although that being said, they're very hard to play on the highest level. So initially, Blade will probably perform way better for most people than both of these classes will, but on the highest level, I think having so many tools on your toolkit, more buttons than anyone, you never have to worry about cooldowns. You don't have mana issues either. You have range pressure, melee pressure, burst potential, protected movement. I think these classes are amazing. The only downside really is they're very squishy. So if you're not good at the game yet, you will probably get quite frustrated playing them because they're hard and squishy. Next up is Hawkeye. This one is also very matchup dependent, does very well against melee classes again. But in a lot of situations, I would not consider this an amazing class by any means. Very high cooldowns, so you can't really put up the pressure when you need to in a lot of situations. And since this is a solo queue tier list and not a pre-made tier list, I don't think Hawkeye is amazing, but I also don't think it's horrible. I think if you're really good at this class and you know your timings and your windows, and you also understand how to support your team with it, because in a lot of ways, Hawkeye is a second support. If that makes sense, like a second support to your Bard or your Holy Knight or whatever. I think Hawkeye is kind of a DPS support class more so than an actual DPS in a lot of cases, because you can peel for your teammates very well since you will probably not get chased down as much as others. So use the space that you're given on Hawkeye and try to peel and support your teammates when they go in. Next up is Holy Knight, and I think Holy Knight is probably the best solo queue class in the entire game, just because it has a lot of support tools like Bard, and if you didn't know, damage reduction is one of, if not the best tool in the entire game, because there's no outplay potential besides running away from it. So if the Holy Knight puts up a shield or a damage reduction buff, your team immediately gets the benefit from that without any skill required. Bard requires a lot more targeted support than Holy Knight does, and Holy Knight on top of that does have decent burst and a decent damage potential. Although it's obviously not as much as DPS classes, but it's still there and you can still utilize that. Holy Knight is amazing, and it's also fairly easy to execute, so if you like that class, go for it. It's going to be called Paladin, by the way, in our version. Oh yeah, a quick disclaimer, Devil Hunter is actually called Deadeye, Hawkeye is actually called Sharpshooter in our version, Demonic is called Shadow Hunter, I believe, and Battlemaster is called War Dancer. Next up is Infighter, which in our version will be called Scrapper as far as I know. I think Infighter is somewhat underrated, but at the same time it still struggles a fair amount. The Infighter is one of the most tanky fighter classes, if not the most tanky one, but at the same time she lacks AoEs, which is a big deal as a DPS class in this game, and she obviously has no range pressure. Getting good damage numbers on this class is not easy, and generally speaking, she struggles a little bit in all types, on all like levels of play. I think she's kind of underrated because she does have a double dash, and dash is one of the most useful tools in the entire game. at avoiding CC, but generally speaking she is struggling, and especially because she doesn't have any AoE, and her single target DPS outside of her ultimate obviously isn't that great either. And next up is Soulmaster. I actually have a hot take, and that is that Soulmaster is probably better at Blade at the highest level of play. But I think for this tier list we'll put her right here, right below Blade. A lot of people underestimate this class, I think, and in good hands this class is very explosive, has insane burst mobility, insane burst damage, and a ranged CC, hard CC, which is really nice to peel for your teammates. It's just a great class that can, you know, adapt to any situation, which is obviously really nice to have in a SoloQ environment. On top of that, I think her ultimate is not amazing, and her downtime between identity pops is also a downside to this class, so I would never put her at the highest level here, but she does have a lot of potential, so keep that in mind. Next up is Striker, which is the counterpart, the male counterpart to Battlemaster or War Dancer. Striker is probably the worst class in the game, hands down. I think Striker has a lot of problems that Battlemaster has, but at the same time doesn't have the team utility. So you will struggle engaging with this class, you will struggle doing damage with this class. You do have one super armor dash, which is actually really nice, but generally speaking the class isn't that amazing. You can still make it work. There's people that still put a lot of pressure up with it, but you got to be really good at it, and it is the biggest handicap you can give yourself, really. Next up is Summoner. Yeah, I think Summoner is either lowest S or highest A tier. I think the class has a lot of vulnerabilities because she has very little movement and you know, limited ways to peel herself and protect herself. In a team environment, obviously, in SoloQ, it depends on what team the enemy team is playing and how much they're focusing you and how much your team is protecting you. This is probably the class with the most potential damage output in the entire game. Again, it depends how much peel you're getting and how much peel or how much aggression the enemy team is putting on you. And last but not least, Warlord, which I would put at highest A tier, above Summoner actually. Although it's not a DPS class at all, I think Warlord is another support class with an amazing shield, and generally speaking just very good at peeling your teammates, and also very good at just being a wall, just being a meat shield between you and your teammates and the enemy, obviously. I think Warlord is very hard to CC, is very hard to pin down, especially in good hands, because he also has the lowest dash cooldown in the game, which is amazing. Both of his ultimates are also quite useful. On top of that, I think the class is a little clunky and a little heavy, and that's probably why it's not an S tier, but overall I think Warlord is amazing as well. And our version, this will obviously be called Gunlancer. If you're into that, I can just recommend this class. It's annoying to play against, and it's amazing to have on your team if the Gunlancer knows what he's doing. And with that being said, that is the entire list. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the subscribe button if you liked it at all, if it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next one. Thank you. Peace.